Hello everyone, welcome to the Scumdog's Kennel. I'm your host, Chris Williams, and in today's Cryptid Corner mini-episode, today I'm going to talk about 3 stories. 2 involving aliens, 1 involving Bigfoot, all of them very fascinating. Let's get into the first article, titled 1972 Tack-in UFO Intrusion, JBLM High Strangeness. And here exactly what took place back in 72, folks, and what it was all about. On October 14th, 1972, an alleged security incident near McCord Air Force Base in Pierce County, Washington, brought together military personnel, a tack-in site, and a reported saucer-shaped craft in one of the stranger stories ever tied to the installation. The account has circulated for years in UFO literature, but it remains unverified in the public record, making the location itself just as important as the incident. Machode, now part of Joint Base Lewis Machode, sits within a vast military landscape of dense woods, prairies, wetlands, and restricted terrain areas in a region already saturated with modern UFO history and long-range Sasquatch lore. The account, attributed to former Fosse-connected source Robert Collins, claims that on October 14, 1972, 2 Air Force personnel, Stephen Briggs and Dennis Helsgate, were sent to inspect a tack-in facility east of McChode Air Force Base. According to the story, the site check began normally until Briggs heard an unusual high-pitched engine sound outside the building. When he went out to investigate, he reportedly saw a saucer-shaped craft hovering over the tack-in compound before descending and landing nearby. Collins later circulated the story publicly in the UFO field, but I found no publicly released official case file confirming it. Briggs then ran back inside and alerted Hillsgig. The 2 men returned outside and allegedly saw 2 humanoid beings approaching the fenced perimeter. Startled, they retreated into the building and called base security. A desk sergeant received the report and dispatched a patrol unit to the tack-in site. By the time the security police arrived, the 2 airmen were described as shocked and largely unable to communicate. One of them, Hillsgate, was said to have a burn mark on his face. Again, this sequence survives as an alleged narrative in secondary UFO sources, not as a declassified official record that I could verify. The story grows stranger from there. After the first responders arrived, one of the security men reportedly noticed unusual soil impressions, then looked up to see the object hovering overhead. Once more, radio communication allegedly failed. At the site, the officers withdrew with the 2 shaken airmen, then called for additional backup. Once they were further from the immediate area, that communication failure, temporary withdrawal, and later return are among the more cinematic parts of the account, but they also highlight the central problem with the case. It is dramatic, detailed, and still unsupported by a released primary document. According to the same telling, a later search team with a military dog found suspicious activity south of the tack-in site. One security policeman reportedly confronted 2 humanoid figures near a remote power station, ordered them to halt, saw what looked like a weapon in one figure's hand, and fired 6 rounds from his revolver. More personnel then allegedly arrived, located a landed saucer-shaped craft, and watched it ascend and vanish. Collins maintained that a Fosse investigated the event and classified it top secret, leaving it unresolved. That is the core legend. It is a compelling narrative, but at present it remains an allegation embedded in UFO lore, not a publicly substantiated military case. Very interesting, folks, but let's read the next article now. Dulce, New Mexico experiencer claims he saw the hidden alien lab beneath Archuleta Mesa, and read exactly what happened with this story as well. For decades, Dulce, New Mexico has sat at the center of one of the most persistent underground base legends in American UFO lore. The story grew out of the late 1970s cattle mutilation investigations, local reports of strange lights, and the later claims of abductees and researchers who believed something covert was operating beneath Archuleta Mesa. One of the most disturbing accounts came from experiencer Krista Telton, who said that after a 1987 abduction event, she was taken into a multi-level underground facility where humans, greys, laboratory rooms, containment tanks, and medical procedures were all part of the same hidden system. Whether one sees the account as literal, symbolic, or manipulated, it remains one of the best-known testimonies associated with the Dulce narrative. Let's read her actual story now, folks. I heard stories about Dulce for years, but I never imagined I would become part of that mystery myself. What happened to me in July 1987 was not something I understand. At first, I had missing time, fragments of fear, and the sense that something had happened to me against my will. Later, through hypnosis, I began recalling a sequence of events that led me to believe I had been taken by non-human entities to an underground facility beneath Dulce, New Mexico. I remember being confronted by 2 small aliens who forced me into a craft. Before that, my memory had gone blank. When awareness returned, I was inside a small ship and still disorientated. A human-like being, someone I came to think of as a guide, helped me regain consciousness. I was then taken outside and found myself on a hill. From there, we moved through a tunnel into an underground complex guarded by men in red military-style jumpsuits. Inside, I was led through what appeared to be a heavily controlled facility with multiple levels. Everything felt organized, compartmentalized, and clinical. I was told to change into a patient gown. At one point, I stepped onto a scale-like device. A screen lit up. Strange tones and frequencies filled the air. The sound hurt my ears and made the whole procedure feel invasive and deliberate, as if I were being scanned or measured. As I moved deeper into the complex, the atmosphere became even more disturbing. I entered a large room that smelled like formaldehyde. I saw huge tanks, roughly 4 feet high, fitted with gauges and mechanical arm-like devices. The guide hurried me away from there and into a much larger laboratory. Because I had worked as a nurse, the metallic sounds immediately struck me. I recognized the clinking as being similar to surgical instruments being prepared for use. That realization filled me with dread. I was told to sit at a table. In the center of the room, a human male entered. I interpreted him as a doctor or surgeon. Around him were grays assisting the procedure. I knew I was being examined internally. When I raised my head, I saw a gray staring at me with huge black eyes. Then I felt a stabbing pain and screamed. The human doctor came over and rubbed something cold across my stomach. The pain stopped almost immediately, as if they had shut it off. After that, I saw something I have never forgotten. Along the walls were clear casing-like chambers. Inside them were what looked like at first like wax figures, human forms of different kinds standing motionless behind transparent barriers. I moved closer and realized these were not displays that looked like actual beings or bodies held in suspension. I could not process what I was looking at. I also saw animals in cages. They were alive. What affected me most was the feeling that the Greys were not acting independently. I came away with the impression that they were being directed by a higher intelligence, something more advanced and more calculating. The whole place felt purposeful. Nothing there seemed random. Everything suggested experimentation, control, and secrecy. In the time since, I came to believe that Dulce was not unique. I believed that there were other underground installations used for covert activity and testing, that those involved preferred to keep hidden beneath the surface, away from public scrutiny. That is what I remember. That is what I was shown, and whether people accept it or not, I have never been able to shake the conviction that somewhere beneath the earth, things are being done that most of us are never meant to see. Krista Telton. Now, everyone, here are the pictures that Krista Telton drew of this base under Dulce, folks. As you can see, she drew the beings in tubes. Some of them appear to basically be alien, or maybe they're human folks. Either way, this is the medical facility that she drew the best she could, with the bodies, sometimes babies, sometimes adults, and sometimes animals being experimented on. And apparently this is an idea of the tunnels that she has a thought that might be under the base as well. Either way, very interesting, isn't it, folks? But let's move on to the next article, which involves Bigfoot this time. Let's hear about what this person experienced with this shocking revelation that this entity exists. The article is titled, South Central New Mexico Bigfoot, a smelly night visitor knocks at our door. Let's read exactly what, this family had to deal with when basically an actual hairy man came to visit them, folks. So let's read on. And here, the experiencer's full account. In a South Central New Mexico community, a witness described a repeated late-night visits by a large, foul-smelling intruder that seemed bold enough to approach homes, open an exterior door, knock on entryways, and leave urine high on the glass. The account stands out because it is not a single fleeing sighting. It reads like an ongoing pattern of neighborhood-level behavior, with another nearby resident reporting the same disturbances. So, let's get into this account and hear exactly what took place with, this neighborhood and nearby neighbors as well. I live in South Central New Mexico, and for a while, something has been coming around our place late at night, usually somewhere between about 11:30 p.m. and 2 o'clock a.m. It does not happen every night, but it happens often enough that I started paying very close attention to the pattern. At first, I did not know what to think. I had read enough strange reports over the years that I know better than to casually step outside just because somebody or something was at the door. What at first caught my attention was how it handled the outer glass door. I realized something had been opening it, so I started locking it. Before I began locking it, the door opened one night and a huge hand came up and covered the peephole. That was enough for me. After that, the glass door stayed locked. The next morning, I found urine on the glass. We cleaned it off, thinking maybe it was some one-time act of vandalism or animal behavior that made no sense. But then it came back and did it again. This time, I left it alone so I could study it. Wherever it started on the glass, the stain suggested that whatever did it was standing high enough off the ground to be neither a small animal nor something I could easily explain away. As strange as that was, I was not the only one dealing with it. My neighbor and I started comparing notes, and that is when it became impossible for me to dismiss it as imagination. We were both having similar problems. We started jokingly referring to the thing as Harry, our hairy person problem, but the truth is that neither of us found it funny. One thing we noticed right away was the smell. When this thing came around, there was a distinct odor like a wet skunk with a trace of dirty wet dog. It was very different from an actual skunk. A skunk smell hangs around. This smell would come in, hit hard, and then seem to move off. Around Easter, something else came through that was even worse. The odor was absolutely putrid. The classic stomach-turning stench people always describe in these kinds of reports. I am still not convinced it was the same visitor. The knocking became one of the most frustrating parts of the whole thing. It would come to the front door and knock sometimes more than once in a night, and the little dogs would go wild. They did not just bark, they lunged. My neighbor and I finally decided to experiment with the sound ourselves. I knocked on the glass, and the dogs barely cared. Then I knocked on the wooden frame, and then got them going. That told me something important. Whatever was out there seemed to know exactly how to strike the door to provoke a reaction. That is what bothered me the most. The behavior felt deliberate. It did not seem like blind aggression. If the thing meant to create real destruction, it could have smashed a window and caused complete chaos. Instead, it snooped around, checked the windows, but did not touch them. It kept returning to the door as if it enjoyed aggravating the dogs and stirring everybody up. One Friday, I had a garage sale. Items set out in the carport, including my mother's Christmas wreaths, still wrapped in large garbage bags. That night, Harry came back. He knocked on the door, prowled around outside for quite a while, and my neighbor and I messaged back and forth as it moved between our places. She would smell it first, then I would. It lingered around for the better part of an hour, long enough that we even began to suspect where it might be hiding when it stayed out of view. The next morning I went outside to put things back out for the sale. That is when I noticed that some of the wreaths carried the odor, not all of them. Just certain ones, and only in certain places. That is what really got to me. If a skunk had sprayed or brushed against them, everything would have been foul. Instead, only 1 or 2 wreaths had traces of the smell, and only on parts of them. Out of 24 wreaths, it seemed to have handled only a few. The odor showed up on a few other items too, things positioned well off the ground and on the door to a closet in the carport. That made it look less like a random contact and more like an examination. It seemed to be touching things selectively, almost filling them. With the wreaths, I got the distinct impression that they were testing the artificial greenery, checking its texture to see whether it was real. This is the part that shook me. It suggested curiosity and intelligence. My neighbor found that exciting. I found it unnerving. My 85-year-old mother, oddly enough, thought it was fascinating. She said it proved these were intelligent beings and not just animals. A few times I thought I caught a glimpse of a shadow when I looked outside, but never enough to clearly identify it. Still, the pattern felt obvious. Anytime something new was left out in the carport or around the property, it seemed to come by to inspect it, not like a predator about to attack, but like a noisy neighbor making rounds through the neighborhood after dark. I later spoke with a man who told me he knew others nearby who had similar experiences. He mentioned a co-worker who lives nearby and has repeatedly seen one. According to him, everyone in her family has seen it, and not in the distant past, but recently. At that point, I stopped thinking of this as one isolated, odd incident. It began to look like a recurring pattern in this area. A large, melodious, intelligent, nocturnal presence moving through a residential pocket as though it already knew the terrain, the homes, the dogs, and the routines of the people living here. Well, that is fascinating, isn't it, folks? And we're going to discuss this in a moment, as well as with the original 2 stories we read through the day, folks. Either way, fascinating stories, aren't they, folks? And all of them can basically be said to basically have very odd points about them. And the 2 stories with the possible alien contact, the government looks like it could be involved, both with the account of these aliens near this base with, up in Washington, as well as with Dulce. Could the government be working with them? What about these Bigfoot? Could they also be intelligent and maybe working with them, folks? Because we've heard of other reports of them working with aliens too. Either way, we're at the end, folks. So please go subscribe to my YouTube channel. Read comics that are bad for you. You can use the YouTube links down below in descriptions or the chat to go subscribe to me. Hit that like button for me. Make sure you're still subscribed. Leave some comments down below. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure to hit the part of the bell that'll give you all future notifications. And please share this video out. I'm Chris Williams from the Scumdogs Kennel. Thank you all for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow with another great video, so be sure to come back again then. Until next time, folks, I'll see you all again soon.